Hey, how's your week going? I hope you're all healthy and getting by. It's Christine here, and you can find me on Instagram at Christine Grace Smith. Welcome back to another episode of our Debunking the Lunacy series, where we analyse the latest mass psychosis and mysteries our current culture has to offer. Today, we will be discussing a very prominent person in the media right now, Mr. Andrew Tate. Now, today I will not be discussing the views and opinions of Andrew Tate and whether they align with my personal thoughts and opinions. That's not the purpose of this video. The purpose of this video is to form an objective stance to highlight the violation of another human being's human rights, a violation that was made so public, and how we as a society have allowed this violation to take place right before our eyes because we were told by the mainstream media, this is a person to hate, this is a villain, because clearly there's no such thing as free thought anymore and people have to listen to what a man in the TV tells them instead of making up their minds for themselves. We've never needed Pink Floyd more. We don't need no thought control. December 29th, 2022, the news hit our screens with the following headlines. Andrew Tate, misogynist influencer, and his brother arrested for human trafficking. Funny how, if you was to Google the term human trafficking on that day, December 29th, 2022, you would be greeted with a whole page of results showing Andrew Tate. According to Google, all other human trafficking actually proven ceased to exist that day. And all the search results showed was Tate, despite the fact that it hadn't even been proven and no evidence was put forward. But anyway, despite the fact that on that same day, December 29th, 2022, a story was released naming JP Morgan, one of the wealthiest companies and banks in the world. A company tied to the Rockefellers was found to have heavily benefited financially from Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking operation. A proven sex trafficking operation, whilst failing to report any suspicious activity. But the media didn't want you to see that story. All they cared about was showing you the big, bad, scary Andrew Tate and how he had a proven sex trafficking operation, all whilst failing to report any suspicious activity. Funny that. But the media didn't want you to see that story. All they cared about was showing you the big, bad, scary Andrew Tate and how he is a human trafficker, all with no evidence to prove it. It would be absurd to suggest that the mainstream media would help hide this story of JP Morgan, wouldn't it? Because the media definitely isn't owned by all the same people. That's just crazy talk, isn't it? That's a whole other dilemma in itself, but I just wanted to make the point. December 29th, 2022. Tate is arrested in his country of residence, which is Romania, along with his brother Tristan and two Romanian women. They were held on suspicion of human trafficking, rape, and forming an organised crime group. Orchestrated by DICOT, the Directorate for Investigating Organised Crime and Terrorism, a law enforcement agency of the Romanian government tasked with investigating and prosecuting organised crime, drug trafficking, cybercrime, financial crimes, and terrorism-related offences. They were initially detained for 24 hours, which was then extended to 30 days. A further 30 days was then added in January, allowing them to be held until the 27th of February 2023. At this point, there was still no sufficient admissible evidence to convict the pair, but they remained detained and deprived of their liberty. Article 5 of the European Convention on Human Rights provides your right to liberty and security. It's the same here in the UK under Article 5 of the Human Rights Act 1998. The articles provided in the European Convention on Human Rights are applicable to all countries that are a part of the European Union, for which Romania is a member state, and it basically protects every human being within these member states. If a country is seen to deprive an individual of any of their basic human rights outlined here, it sets a very dangerous precedent for every individual also residing under these constitutions. Specifically, the European Convention on Human Rights details that Article 5 focuses on protecting individuals' freedom from unreasonable detention as opposed to protecting personal safety. You have a right to your personal freedom. This means you must not be imprisoned or detained without any good reason. If you are arrested, the Human Rights Act provides that you have a right to be told in a language that you understand why you have been arrested and what charges you face. You also have a right to be taken to court promptly. You have a right to bail, subject obviously to certain conditions. You have a right to a trial within a reasonable time. And you have a right to go to court to challenge your detention if you think it's unlawful. And of course, from that, you are entitled to compensation if you have been unlawfully detained. I don't know if Andrew Tate was informed that he was under arrest in English or Romanian, so I can't really comment on that, but I do know that he was not taken to court under which most normal circumstances would deem promptly. Nor do I think that the right to have a trial within a reasonable time was satisfied. There are restrictions on Article 5, there are certain circumstances in which public authorities can detain you as long as they're acting within the law. This applies, for example, if you have been found guilty of a crime and sent to prison. The restriction applies if you have not done something a court has ordered you to do. If there is reasonable suspicion that you have committed a crime, or if someone is trying to stop you from committing a crime, or they're trying to stop you from running away from a crime. Another restriction is if you have a mental health condition which makes it necessary to detain you, or if you're capable of spreading infectious disease, or you're attempting to enter the country illegally. The only one here that I could personally see as being manipulated to the Tate's case is that there might be reasonable suspicion that you have committed a crime. But I would argue that given that here in the UK, reasonable suspicion is constituted by what an ordinary person would think was fair if they had all the information that the police had. Given that the Romanian police to this day have yet to release any evidence or any information pertaining to such a high publicity case, I think it's safe to assume that most ordinary people, if we exclude our personal opinions and simply look at the information provided, for which there is none, most people would agree that there's not enough information provided as to constitute reasonable suspicion that Andrew Tate is committing any criminal acts. Saying provocative things, yes perhaps, but criminal offences? Not from anything that I've seen with my own eyes. And if I can figure that out, I'm sure any competent lawyer could do a far better job than me. Thus, this restriction upon Tate's trial being held within a reasonable time should not be upheld, and they should be considering this breach of human rights and the lack of evidence associated, and either take him to trial or drop the case. We cannot keep exploiting a human being's rights just because they've been villainized by the mainstream media. It's inhumane, it's immoral on every level, and it sets a malevolent precedent telling every one of us that our human rights do not matter if the system has deemed you a target for your personal beliefs. Which, if you're scared to speak out against the current trending narratives, or you only believe what you see on the news, don't worry, you've got nothing to worry about. You can rest assured in your docile ignorance, and rest you will, as you are most definitely asleep. This brings me to Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights, the right to freedom of expression, which clearly is no longer a human right, as the Romanian authorities and the rest of the world have allowed for a breach of an individual's human rights because they disagree with his opinions and beliefs. So, clearly we don't have the right to express our personal beliefs only so far as they agree with the current set politically correct beliefs and opinions. We now live in an authoritarian culture where your human rights are breached if you do not uphold beliefs and opinions that fit the current status quo. But my personal analysis aside, let's look at the black and white of it. Article 10 protects your right to hold your own opinions and to express them freely without government interference. This includes the right to express your views aloud, for example, public protests and demonstrations, or through published articles, books, leaflets, television or radio broadcasting, works of art, the internet, and social media. The law also protects your freedom to receive information from other people by, for example, being part of an audience or reading a magazine. Now, to go very broad with this, there's a few cases that I want to mention as to why I believe this right is disintegrated on a daily basis by social media corporations. Let's look at Candace Owens and Matt Walsh. Both bountiful YouTube personalities who boldly and bravely express their opinions on YouTube despite being deemed controversial and often speaking out against the current woke agenda. Both these names have been censored and demonetized for expressing their personal beliefs, specifically regarding gender on the internet. Videos expressing their personal opinions, which I'm sure many would deem factual rather than opinionated, but for argument's sake, let's just call them opinions. Either way, their right to express themselves was prohibited in the name of wokeness, at least to some degree, by YouTube, a platform originally viewed as an instrument for freedom of speech that has now evolved into an instrument for the restriction of it. Let's expand outside personal opinion. What about professional opinion? This video may well get censored just for me uttering his name, but Dr. Robert Malone, a physician, virologist, and biochemist with an until recently very well-respected reputation, having worked for years advising the government and a large contributor to the invention of mRNA technology, this well-respected doctor gave well-informed professional advice regarding a recent medical development for which the same reasons he was censored. I can't even say the name of this medication, otherwise you may not even get to see this video. However, for simply expressing his professional opinion, he was banned off almost all social media platforms, despite providing overwhelming evidence for his professional prescription. Also, appearances that he made on podcasts and various other videos were also censored and ultimately taken down. So clearly, if there are things that we cannot speak of anymore without being censored, then Article 10, freedom to expression, simply fails its purpose as a human right in 2023. Andrew Tate articulates his thoughts and opinions very well, and he expresses them on the internet, for which, according to Article 10, he is free to do so. Freedom of speech and expression mean that we understand that as diverse human beings, sometimes people will say things that may provoke us, or perhaps that we may not like, but we have to accept that these different opinions exist. We simply cannot aim to cleanse our society of opinions that we do not share, otherwise we end up in a tyrannical system where all freedom is ultimately lost. So why is it that Andrew Tate and the other cases that I've named were seemingly stripped of their human right to expression? Are we headed down a tyrannical slippery slope? I think the answer is blatantly obvious, but I'm just here to present a different analysis, and I leave the details to you to decipher your own opinions from your own perception of how this video is received. The allowed restrictions to Article 10 state that public authorities may restrict this right if they can show that their action is lawful, necessary and proportionate in order to protect national security or public safety, to prevent disorder and crime, to protect health or morals, to protect the rights and reputations of other people, to prevent the disclosure of information received in confidence, and to maintain the authority and impartiality of judges. An authority may be allowed to restrict your freedom of expression if, for example, you express views that encourage racial or religious hatred. However, the relevant public authority must show that the restriction is proportionate, in other words, that it is appropriate and no more than necessary to address the issue concerned. Andrew Tate does not encourage disorder or crime. His words are often used to enrich the lives of people, to encourage better health and better morals. He certainly does not infringe upon anyone else's rights, but rather preaches for the protection of everyone's individual rights to live their lives for themselves. And if you disagree, I can almost definitely gather that you have never watched an unedited, long-form interview with him, and you've most definitely fallen for some kind of clickbait where, like any of us, he can be taken out of context. So, for all intents and purposes, I have watched a number of long-form Andrew Tate content, hence why I'm confident in my aforementioned statements on the basis of how far my own knowledge extends, which is based off of what I have seen and heard with my own eyes and ears. Andrew Tate certainly doesn't encourage any religious or racial hatred. The first thing that comes to mind here is questioning why his freedom to expression is restricted. But the freedom of expression for woke leftists who openly mock religion, specifically Christianity, and they often paint Christians as bigots, homophobes, and racists, which substantially promotes religious hatred. They're allowed to do this on a daily basis without any restriction to their expressions. The absurdity of the world right now, it breaks my heart. No longer do we care for each other's freedoms. No longer do we care for a healthy functioning society. No longer can we agree on maintaining basic human rights as the basis for our society's function. Never before have we been more divided as a species. I've never in my life seen so much hate amongst us. So many emotions being toyed with and ultimately used to villainize anyone who aims to empower people against the current regimes of the system. The word tolerance has been weaponized, and the word masculinity bigoted. Men and women with strong values and morals have become the enemy, and the understanding of good versus evil has been morphed and diluted. We live in a world that disguises hate, division, and intolerance under the guise of equality, peace, and acceptance. Truth is, whether you agree with a word Andrew Tate says or not, whether you think he is a force for good or evil is irrelevant to the point that I'm trying to make. The point being, I believe it is our duty as human beings to ensure that we don't see the human rights of our fellow human beings infringed upon. Regardless of our egos and our opinions, it is our duty as individuals who make up a society, to discern a basic fundamental principle and understanding of what is morally right and fair to each other. As individuals, we must ensure our opinions are our own. We must investigate and we must question everything before our eyes. Now more than ever before, we must seek to think for ourselves. The purpose of this video is not to sway you toward an opinion, but rather to provide some information to encourage you to think and investigate for yourself. Notice the patterns. See where this infringement movement is becoming all the more popular, where peaceful people, not demonstrating or encouraging any kind of violence or criminal acts, they're being silenced. I thought it best to try demonstrate this through Andrew Tate, given that he is probably the most well-known case of this right now, but see if you can spot the pattern in any other places. You may come to realise that our society is covered in it. I will be following the Andrew Tate case, of course. The verdict of a person's guilt should not infringe upon their human rights. The law is there to serve a purpose. Once we say that one person loses their human rights, criminal or not, the purpose of the Human Rights Act and the ECHR, the European Convention on Human Rights, loses all meaning and precedent. Once one person's rights are warped, we should all be very, very worried for our own and the human rights of the people that we love. Let me know in the comments your thoughts of any other cases where you believe any of these rights, specifically freedom to expression, have been restricted. The West is supposed to be a place of freedom of speech, but we seem to be losing that value more and more every day. We must fight for our right to express ourselves freely, not with violence, but with words and the beauty of language. Language is the single greatest tool that we have in modern Western society to exercise our right to freedom of thought, speech, and expression. Don't be afraid to voice your opinions. Don't be afraid to speak out against the status quo. And don't be afraid to question everything for yourself. Wishing you all a wonderful week. Be sure to like the video on your way out, and if you're not already subscribed, please do so. Your support means a lot to me, and it lets me know that my message is being well received. And as always, let's remain harmonious in the adversity of opinion.